Whether or not you know it, your life has been touched by Henrietta Lacks, an African-American woman, the closest thing we have to a real-life superhero. Join me today on Walk with History as we talk about her Immortal cell line from Clover, Virginia. I'm at the Henrietta Lacks marker, and this is located in Clover, Virginia, right on the outskirts of the town on Highway 360. If you want to know the exact location, sign up for our membership and you can download a map of where we're actually at. But this marker is put here in remembrance of probably their most important and influential resident, and that's Henrietta Lacks. And we're going to visit her grave today and other locations that are connected to her life, why she lived here, when she lived here, and why she was finally buried here. So Henrietta Lacks was born in 1920, August 1st. She was born Loretta Pleasant, that was the name that she was given, and in Roanoke, Virginia, to Eliza Pleasant and John Pleasant. She had hazel eyes. They said she has a very small waist, size 6 shoe, and she's always wearing red nail polish as she gets older, of course, and a pleated skirt. But it was when she's 4 years old that her mother dies, giving birth to her 10th child, and her father can't care for all those children, so he brings them back here to Clover, Virginia, and he gives the children out to different members of the family to help take care of. And Henrietta goes to her mom's grandfather. His name is Thomas, and he lives in a 2-story log cabin. So something like this is more of a barn, but probably in the same general area, a 2-story log cabin that was once the slave quarters. I feel like a lot of these older buildings that are in this area were probably once enslaved quarters. Lacks worked the tobacco farm here. This is what was grown here in this part of Virginia, was tobacco. And she went to a segregated school, so this is 1924, and she grows up here, she lives here, but she drops out in the 6th grade, and she drops out in the 6th grade to help support her family. And then it's in 1935, when she's 14 years old, that she gives birth to her first child. And then in 1939, she gives birth to her second child. Her first child's a son, her second child's a daughter. So we followed a GPS coordinate on Find a Grave for Henrietta's husband, David Lacks, because Henrietta's coordinates on her Find a Grave is for the marker that we went to. And I figured if we followed David Lacks, they're buried beside each other, it would take us to the gravesite. But it took us here to, it looks like a farm house. This is off of Lackstown Road. So this is more than likely the tobacco farm that Henrietta Lacks worked. Lackstown is the ancestral farmland of the Lacks family. Now, when I say Lacks family, that's the white Lacks family and the black Lacks family, because Henrietta Lacks comes from enslaved people that were owned by the Lacks family, but her great-great-grandfather was white, and he was a white Lacks. You can draw your own conclusions from that, but this is the land. She was a tobacco farmer. Thank goodness to the people of Clover, because we couldn't find Henrietta Lacks' gravesite. It's not marked. Her husband's site that the GPS coordinates give you, I think gives you where they lived, out in the tobacco farm. And we found some people on the side of the road and asked them where Henrietta Lacks' gravesite was, and they gave us country directions. Go down the hill, the yellow house with the door open, you're gonna make a right, go down that path, and you're gonna find the gravesite. And thank goodness they did. Again, we'll mark this site, and when you become a member of our page, we'll have these sites available to you. So I'm at the gravesite of Henrietta Lacks, and she's buried beside her mother, and she's buried beside her daughter. Her mother, on the one side, Ellen Pleasant. I told you before, she dies in childbirth with her 10th child when Henrietta is just 4 years old. And then her second daughter, she has her first son here in Clover. She has her first daughter here in Clover. This is her first daughter. And then after that, she's married in 1951 in April, here in Clover, not in Clover, but here in this county. And then at the end of that year, her and her husband David moved to Baltimore, Maryland, to have more opportunity, escape the racism that is here in the South, and they moved to Maryland. And it's in Maryland where she gives birth to 3 more children. That last child, born in 1950, in November of 1950, she finds starts to feel a knot in her womb. The quote that she said. She went to the Johns Hopkins Medical Center in Maryland, one of the few places that African Americans could go. She goes there in August of 1951 with severe abdominal pain. She passes away in October of 1951. But during that time that she was there, she had biopsies taken of healthy cell tissue and cancerous cell tissue, and it's those samples that will spawn the HeLac cell line. Now, these were taken unbeknownst to her. They were studied unbeknownst to her. We'll talk about the ethics about that later, but that's where the cell line comes from. When Henrietta is treated for cervical cancer at Johns Hopkins University, she's treated by Dr. Howard Jones, and he's the one who takes the initial biopsies. Those biopsies are given to a Dr. Gay, and the method of labeling that he used was the first two initials of your first name and your last name, and that's why they're called the HeLa cell line for her name, Henrietta Lacks, HeLa. And Dr. Gay is a researcher at Johns Hopkins, and he observes that her cells reproduce at a high rate. And not only that, but they're kept alive long enough to do in-depth research and exams, something that they had not found. Started the idea that they could start to do biomedical experiments and research on them. Her cells were the first to be divided multiple times without dying. And that's why they're called Immortal. And that's why her cell line is the Immortal HeLa cell line. And that's why she's the Immortal Henrietta Lacks. These cells have led to breakthroughs in AIDS, the polio vaccine, the COVID vaccine, in vitro fertilization, leukemia, cancer research. Henrietta Lacks has touched all of our lives. What her body was able to do for biomedical research has touched everybody. Her cell line is used today. It is one of the most predominantly used cell lines in medical research. In 1955, her cells were the first cells cloned, and her cells have been used on 11,000 patents. But this grave was unmarked until 2010 and just got a marker in 2010. So we get the ethical questions, right? Henrietta Lacks is African American, 1951, in a segregated hospital where her cells are taken, and her cell line is used to produce medical research that saves every race, every gender. And she wasn't compensated, and biomedical companies make billions of dollars on what her cell line was able to find and discover, and her family was never paid for it. After she dies, her children again are distributed among her family, and they have suffered traumas and abuse just like her and her brothers and sisters did after her mother died. They grow up in poverty. So here's her mother's cell line, their mother's cell line, who's creating medical breakthroughs that are making millions and millions of dollars, and their family is living in poverty. So this is where the ethical questions come into play, is how much should her family been compensated? Plus their gene grafting is sold, their privacy is sold. People learn about their medical backgrounds. But what her descendants really want and have asked for, they want people to celebrate her. They want people to know her, to acknowledge her. They want the HeLa cells to be known that they came from an African American woman, and she was flesh and blood. She had a family, and she has a story. So I hope that that's what I'm bringing you today on Walk with History, her story. She mattered. She was an amazing woman. She was a mother, and she has touched all of our lives. We all have healthy, longer living lives, and our children will have longer living lives because Henrietta Lacks existed, and she matters. So I hope from Walk with History, you know the superhero of the world is Henrietta Lacks. And if you know me, you know that I love Wonder Woman. Wonder Woman is my favorite character. And to me, Henrietta Lacks is Wonder Woman. So today at her grave, I am gonna leave a Wonder Woman in honor of Henrietta Lacks. So I'm gonna leave this at her grave, just so everyone knows that I believe the queen of superheroes is Wonder Woman, and for me, the queen of all superheroes, for us, is Henrietta Lacks. I'm here at the Lacks Family Church in Clover, St. Matthew's Baptist Church, and it's right on Clover Road in Clover, Virginia. But this is where the Lacks family attended church, and I wanted to come here to talk about when the gravestone for Henrietta Lacks was actually dedicated. And that happened in 2010. Again, when she dies in 1951, her grave is unmarked, just that she was buried beside her mother. Like you saw, we went to the gravesite that she's buried beside her mother and beside her daughter. But in 2010, a Roland Pattillo, who's a faculty member at Morehouse School of Medicine and actually worked with Dr. Gay, and he knew the Lacks family, and he donated a headstone for the Lacks. So that's where Henrietta Lacks' gravestone comes from. Now, when the Lacks family were informed that this gravestone was going to be donated, they raised money to put a gravestone in for Henrietta's daughter, who's beside her, Elise Lacks, and that's why Elise Lacks also looks like a newer gravestone beside her mother. She passes away 4 years after her mother at the young age of 15. That is where those gravestones are coming from. This is the road that you head down to see the Henrietta Lacks gravesite at the corner of Lackstown Road and Mount Laurel Road. This is where the plantation was. This is where she lived from the time she was 4 to the time she was 21. She grew up. This is the location where her family grew up, and that's where the Lacks name comes from. You drive down this now, and you'll see a mixture of modern homes. They still have the older homes, the enslaved homes. We actually drove all the way out to the tobacco farm where I believe David Lacks is buried, her husband, but that was the farm where Henrietta grew up and lived. As I think about Henrietta Lacks and the HeLa cell line and the impact it's had, and it still has, on all of us today, I just think throughout her life, through her immortal cells, she makes an immeasurable impact on science, medicine. Without her, our lives would be different than they are today. So I hope you learned who she is. I hope she becomes a superhero to you. And I hope you just are thankful every time you get a vaccine or every time some medicine breakthrough happens that you think of the HeLa cell line. On to my next Walk with History.